If you've ever stood in an old growth forest, I mean, a real one like the Hoh Rainforest in the Olympic National Park, you know the feeling. Trees that were alive before Columbus, before the Black Death, moss so thick, the forest floor is silent. And you realize, I'm a guest here. This place doesn't need me. It was here 1,000 years before I was born. And if we let it, it'll be here 1,000 years after I'm gone. Or you're in the alpine meadows at Paradise on Mount Rainier, wildflowers to the horizon, and you feel small, wonderfully small, part of something so much bigger than yourself. You know, we're a young country, but for a few decades, our leaders had the foresight to protect places that had been untouched since the dawn of time. Teddy Roosevelt, the Antiquities Act, the National Park Service. They looked at these places and said, this belongs to everyone forever. There was an unbroken chain of responsibility. And now it sits with us. Because right now, decisions are being made. And these decisions, at least many of them, are forever. Once you open the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to drilling, you don't get it back. Once you cut old growth, it doesn't regrow in your lifetime or your grandchildren's lifetime. Some of these places took 10,000 years to become what they are. They can be undone in a single administration. The writer Walter Lippmann wrote that the world we deal with politically is, quote, out of reach, out of sight, out of mind. It has to be explored, reported, and imagined. If no one's telling you what's happening to a forest in Alaska or a canyon in Utah, it might as well not be happening. So our guest today is Chris Keyes. He founded Republic, a nonprofit newsroom dedicated entirely to covering America's public lands and the decisions that will shape them long after we're gone.
There's so much going on with our public lands, as Jon was saying. So being able to have Christopher Keyes here with us today, he has led award-winning journalism teams, including as editor-in-chief at Outside Magazine and editorial director at Texas Monthly. But in October, Chris decided to launch a new nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom called Republic, dedicated solely to covering the policies, people, and forces shaping the future of America's 66 million acres of public lands. So thank you so much, Chris, for joining us.
Thanks so much for having us, or having me.
We're excited to have you, and as a measure of the scale of the problem, I think you're off by an order of magnitude, Lisa. It's 660 million.
Is that not what I said? Sorry about that.
It's an unfathomably large number, and maybe that's as good a place to start actually as any. You know, first of all, talk about how do you define public lands? I mean, there's a lot there. There's national parks, there's national forests, there's a lot of other parts to the overall system that we call public land. So how do you think about it?
Sure. So yeah, you can go all the way down to the park outside your suburban neighborhood, but for our purposes, we're really just covering federally managed public lands as well as state lands, which is the bulk of what we're talking about when we talk about 660 million acres. And predominantly our coverage will be about federal lands. And that kind of breaks down into four categories. You've got obviously our national parks, which is what most Americans are familiar with. Then you've got the national forests, which is your wildlife sanctuaries. And then finally, you've got your Bureau of Land Management. And Bureau of Land Management is actually the largest of all of those four categories. And it's probably the area of lands that Americans know least about, and where a lot of the battle lines are drawn when we talk about preserving these lands or using them for extraction.
Super interesting. And so, I mean, maybe just to step back 1 second. Lisa talked about some of the incredible organizations you've helped to lead and been a part of. Outside Magazine, super impactful. But you stepped away from that to do this thing now, and maybe talk a little bit about why Republic, why now.
I've been in media for 25 years, for better or for worse, and it's been a roller coaster ride. There's been a massive amount of contraction in the journalism industry in particular, and especially local news. I think the statistics that I often cite is that there are 75% fewer working journalists in America today than there were 2 decades ago. And again, a lot of that is local newspapers that have folded or been merged with other local papers. There's just been so much contraction in the industry. So I start with that, and then I go back to my experience at Outside, where the whole outdoor industry really relies on these public lands and Americans having access to these lands to recreate. And some of our coverage, particularly during the first Trump administration, with the battles over the Dakota Access Pipeline or the shrinking of the Bears Ears National Monument, the coverage that we did at Outside was some of our most popular during the era. So I know that there's a demand among readers for this type of coverage. And so you combine those two things, knowing that there's that demand and that we just, as a country, have less capacity to cover important issues, particularly public lands issues. I just saw a real need and a niche to fill, and that was where the idea came from.
In Vermont, where I live, a huge amount of the ski areas that we have here are all on national forest land, and I don't think most people who come and ski here or even live here are aware of how much private businesses are utilizing those lands to create these recreational opportunities for us. So it is incredible how much contact we all have with our public lands and might not even realize it. And they're really under threat right now in a way that they haven't been for a long time. So can you talk about, you had mentioned in a conversation we had previously that there is bipartisan support for protecting these public lands. This is one of the few issues that the majority of Americans all seem to be able to agree upon. That doesn't seem to be having a huge impact on what the current administration is doing. So can you talk about why you think that why can this be ignored, and what more are Americans not understanding that's happening that Republic can help raise awareness about?
Yeah, well, I should step back at first and say, I think it's very heartening that Americans really are waking up right now to the fact that we have this unbelievable common trust and that it is under threat. And I say that because I finished the business plan for Republic in April, and about a month later, Utah Senator Mike Lee made his proposal to sell off more than 3 million acres of public lands, which was going to be an amendment in the big, beautiful bill, as they call it. And there was an unbelievable groundswell of Americans coming out and protesting. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, not a huge town. I think we had close to 5,000 people come to a rally to protect public land. So you saw an unbelievable groundswell of interest and support for not selling these and keeping these in public hands. And that eventually caused Mike Lee to pull his amendment. As to why this administration continues to, put forward, I call them unprecedented threats, because it really is unprecedented in our nation's history, the amount of threats from various directions that are coming for these public lands. I think the reason that they are able to get away with it is, historically, environmental issues have been important to Americans, but they don't really travel with them to the ballot box, and they haven't really made an impact on elections. And that's why I think 2026 is going to be a very interesting year, especially out west, where a congressman or congresswoman's stances on public lands is really going to be under scrutiny in ways that it's never been before. And so I think Americans are going to be taking public lands values to the ballot box this year. And we'll see whether that has an effect on, the aggressive stances coming from this administration. Fundamentally, the Trump administration believes in this energy dominance policy. And that means opening up for as much extractive industries as possible in terms of the leasing. And so they have rapidly expanded those leases. A lot of this is going to be tied up in courts, but we certainly aren't out of the woods yet.
Energy dominance, except in wind.
Correct.
Where we just canceled, several or put a halt on several major utility scale wind projects that are, billions of dollars of investment into there.
Absolutely.
In a way that is very hard to square with a, all of the above energy dominance strategy. But
yeah, we're going to try to make coal great again. That's
one of the
outstanding.
Yeah, well, it's also been heartening in as much as disheartening, obviously, to see some of these huge clean energy projects be disbanded right when there's all this investment and jobs being created in this industry.
mm-hmm.
However, many of the lease sales that the administration has put forward for oil and gas, but particularly for they want to support coal mining, and they've put together some of these leases, and they've gotten some of the lowest bids in history because there is so little interest among companies to go backwards into coal. And then same with oil prices as they are, there's just not a lot of demand to go and exploit the resources that are up in Alaska right now, which is great right now, but those circumstances could change really, really quickly.
Yeah. Let's talk about how you do your work, because, one of the phenomena that we talk about on this program and I think probably everybody observes is, as media is moving more toward independence or sort of smaller organizations, the economics of that, the practicalities of the digital distribution platforms mean it's just much easier to do short form stuff. It's much easier to do commentary. There's just kind of realities of those forms of media. You are really taking a different approach. You're in the lane of deeply reported, investigative, highly analytical pieces that are they're print and they're real reporting. And I wonder both about how you think about that strategy and just sort of how you think about the economics of that as well, right? On audience building, because it is a little counter cyclical at this point, or sort of counter to the direction of travel.
Well, I should say we do want to supply a broad spectrum of different mediums and different formats for our journalism. But yes, the core of it is deeply reported long form journalism, especially in these first couple of years. And the reason that I am so focused on long form journalism and narrative journalism is because I've seen the impact that these kinds of stories can have. You can cover the daily drip of information that's coming out of Washington, and people will pay attention to that. But it's a really long, rich story with a story at the center of it, a narrative and characters that people respond to. And I think I brought up this example when I'm in conversation with you in the past, but when I was at Outside about 10 years ago, there was an orca whale in captivity at a amusement park in outside of Vancouver, Canada. And that orca, his name's Tillicum, killed its trainer in the pool. And it was a big sensational story across America, a lot of coverage of this in the immediate aftermath. And we assigned a writer to do kind of a long form piece about how this came to be. And he found that this whale had actually once been at SeaWorld, and there had been a similar accident where a trainer almost died in a similar incident. And the story that he eventually published about this whale's life was incredibly impactful. And it led to some documentary filmmakers wanting to make a film based on this story. And it was called Blackfish. And that came out a couple of years later, eventually won the Oscar. And a couple of years later after that, SeaWorld disbanded its captive breeding activities, which people had been trying to do for decades with protests. And you can draw a direct line between that story and that decision, although it took a long time. And I would love to see that impact happen more quickly. But It's stories like that that really sink into people's minds and cause them to take action on something that they believe in. So that's why I started my career at Outside in part because my parents gave me a subscription to Outside when I was in college. And the
Hmm.
very first magazine that I pulled out, the very first issue was John Krakauer's Into the Wild cover
Wow.
story. And that was
Yeah,
about
wow,
a
yeah.
12,000 word story. And of course, I didn't have the distractions that kids have in college nowadays, but I literally took that magazine and walked back to my dorm reading that story. And then I read it again and I photocopied it and sent it to friends. And I share that story just knowing that how much of an impact a story can have on a person. And so that's why we want to focus on long form. But certainly, we understand we're swimming upstream and there's a lot of opportunity out there to reach audience through short form video and other formats that we'll be playing around with as well.
How are you thinking about developing what your core audience is going to be? I know I read on your website you're working through partnerships
Yes.
as one of the ways. Do you see these partnerships as being the main way of just being able to distribute the work that you're doing, or is this early stage and the Republic.lands becomes the destination you'd like people to end up at eventually?
Yeah, the short answer is I don't know yet. The longer answer, which gets back to the economics John was bringing up about, the newsroom model, is that to build an audience from scratch to Republic.land would require me hiring, boy, at least a dozen journalists right out of the gate who
Mm.
can do daily coverage so it becomes a destination where people want to come every day and see if there's new content. And that's an incredibly expensive proposition. And that's what sort of steered me towards the nonprofit model, because this is a model that has really succeeded on partnership. And it's new to me because being in commercial media for so long, you see every other outlet as a competitor and a competitor for eyeballs. And so I'm really attractive and intrigued by this partnership model where we can work with an Outside magazine or a Wired magazine or The Atlantic. And what we bring to the table is a lot of experience in journalism, knowledge of what a good story is and what will resonate with an audience, and the funding to make those stories possible. So when we go to an outlet and say we're going to bring all of that to them and say we're going to bring you a fully realized product and all you have to do is publish it and credit us at somewhere, that's a pretty attractive offer,
Yep.
especially in this news climate. So first and foremost, in the first couple of years, we will be really relying on those partnerships. And why I say I don't know the answer yet is that there are a number of entities that are structured like Republic that
Mhm.
almost, though they have their own websites and they co-publish on those sites, they are fundamentally reaching existing audiences through brands that they're partnering with. And
Mm.
that's their sole business model. I would like to think that over time, as we grow and we have more capacity to do daily journalism and more, longer stories on a weekly basis, that we'll be developing an audience to Republic.land exclusively. That's my vision right now, but it could be in 3 years that we're thriving just on the partnership model.
I'm curious for those folks who are listening who are trying to build stuff in this space or inspired by this model. Like, what are you learning about building a nonprofit? Having run a nonprofit in the past, I've learned some good things and
Yeah.
some bad things. So I'm curious how it's working for you.
Well, I mean, on a personal level, it's been really exciting because it's been a very steep learning curve. And after working at Outside for so many years, I was in the editor-in-chief role, I think, for 15 years. So there wasn't a lot new on a day-to-day basis. So for me,
Mm.
almost every day I'm waking up to some new challenge. One of the things that I really like about the nonprofit model is that the incentive structures are very different. So obviously in a for-profit model, you're trying to make money. Right about when I entered the business, which was about 2000, was when magazines were just exiting their kind of dominance phase. The 90s were like the heyday of magazines. And right around 2000 is when we started to see the digital transition really ramp up. throughout the 90s, what the magazine industry did was it started to put a premium on growth. And that's what the advertisers really wanted. They wanted to see brands that were growing. And so how brands grew was by essentially giving away their product. So you could get a year subscription to Esquire magazine for, $3, $2.99.
Yeah.
And you got all these efforts and so gradually they eroded all of the revenue they were getting from their actual readers and putting everything into the basket of advertising. And so when digital media came along and you were giving away your product literally for free and trying to transition to that, and then the advertising market would go through these cycles of boom and bust, it became a tremendous amount of pressure on every newsroom. And so during my career, I saw a real erosion between the wall between edit and ad sales. And over time, there was more and more pressure to cover certain topics, to not cover certain topics that might be controversial to advertisers. And while I feel like we always had a healthy dialogue and we're really able to defend our turf, as it were, as editors at Outside, it became exhausting. And one of the things that I do love about the nonprofit space is that that doesn't really exist as much. There are some philanthropists who will come and they'll have their pet cause and want to know how we're going to cover that. But it's easier to say no in those circumstances than it is when, I'm looking at, overseeing a staff of 40 people and my publisher comes and says, we've got a $300,000 deal. Can you not do this? I'd like to think that I would just stand on principle, but I have to think about, these are people's jobs at stake.
Of course.
And those decisions. So that's what I like. What are the challenges? I mean, I've never raised money before. So asking people for money is, right now, I actually enjoy it because I feel like I'm really passionate about what we're doing. And I see it as more of like, giving people an opportunity to be partners in this work than, out there with my tin cup, begging for money. And people really respond to it. And it's created these new relationships that I have that I really enjoy that partnership. To kind of put a bow on it, I don't know enough to know what my challenges are going to be yet. I'm still in the exciting phase.
Asking for money is a kind of it's a skill that, like, as you say, I think at times it can be enjoyable, and other times it's just a kind of it feels like sales, and sort of I've optimized my life not to do sales of any kind, and so like that's so there's sort of that quality that I think one of the other things that I've found challenging, and maybe I think it probably depends a lot on different kinds of organizations, is because nonprofit funding tends to be kind of hit and miss. You sort of apply for a grant, maybe you get a 2-year grant to do this, maybe you get it's sort of hard to do very long-term things because you're sort of always out there, kind of on the hunt. What's the next buffalo you're going to take down, and can you survive until the herd comes around again? And I think that quality of always kind of needing to find funding can be quite challenging. And then the other, and as you sort of alluded to it, that I saw anyway, is you end up in this weird, right? Every large philanthropic funder, particularly like institutional donors, they have some way of looking at the world, right? They've got some program that's about whatever, democratic resilience, or diversity, or like whatever the thing is. It's and most of them are laudable and good, but it's like their particular lens, like emerge from their institutional process and discussions with their stakeholders. And now you need to like kind of conform yourself to sort of fit into that box in order to get that money. And that can, sometimes it works just fine. Sometimes it's a perfect fit. And other times it's a little bit of it feels like you're kind of putting on a bit of an fitting suit of clothes. And, those for me were the main challenge. But there's a lot of good, there's a lot of good things around those, I think.
No, I can certainly see that. And I think we've been really fortunate in that all of our initial grants have just been for general operation. So they're not tied to a particular cause. It's here's the money, you guys go spend it how you see fit to support your organization. But certainly going into this year with some of the larger foundations, I can see tailoring a certain type of coverage area to get a grant that is just solely for a type of project-based grant. And yeah, I think it'll be interesting when we face those challenges, because I don't want to be in that position of like, we are doing this story simply because somebody funded us to do this story.
Yeah.
That's not why we got into this business.
Curious about the dual roles that a lot of journalists who their whole careers have been in writing, and now there's more and more pressure to be a video presence as well. We've Jon and I have had conversations with a lot of different organizations, and there is this increased pressure to become more of a personality and not take that traditional, the journalist isn't the story. And you really are now sort of trying to build a mini brand around the work that you do for a publication. As you're building your team, are you taking that into consideration? Are there conversations that you're having about, like, one of the ways we're really going to be able to get traction is for you not to just write a piece, but for you to then record a piece talking about what you wrote?
Absolutely. It's on my mind all the time. And I'll share this anecdote, which is shortly after we launched, I hired a social media manager, and she's straight out of Columbia Journalism School, just got her master's. And it's great because these master's programs now, they teach these students like not just how to go report a story, but how to use Adobe InDesign and be able to design something really quickly, and how to record video, and how to, all of the kind of skill sets that you need nowadays. So we brought her on board, and we quickly started talking about what our social media strategy was going to be and where we were going to put our focus. And she said, Chris, the best way to get reach right away is for you to start recording some videos. And I said, yeah, absolutely. I know. I'm going to do that. No problem. A week would go by. I'd say, I'm going to do that this week.
Still the best thing that you could do right now, again this week.
Yeah. So about 4 weeks went by until I finally was out on a run, and I just said, you know what, I'm going to pull up my phone and I'm going to record my first one of these. I recorded, 6 or 7, sent them her way. She edited them. Once they were up, I will say, like, once I got over the hump, because I've never been sort of wanting to be out front and forward as a journalist, but I do recognize that it is necessary now. And once I did it, I'm actually already feeling much more comfortable with it and doing it regularly. And we are asking all of our writers to do it. So it only seems
interesting.
Fair. Yeah. And I get more response from that to almost anything that we do. And people seem to really like that in the branding. And I've also come around to the idea that I do need to be the face of this organization, and our writers need to be the face of this organization as well. And I think back to my time at Outside, when I got there, there was a traditional editor's letter that didn't have a byline on it or a picture with it. It was sort of just the voice of the magazine. And what I would say was sort of really is the voice of nowhere, of no one. And I felt, when I became editor-in-chief, that I wanted to, sign my name to it and have my picture there, because I think people really respond. They want to feel like there's a human behind the brands that they read and they connect with. And especially in an era now when, AI is coming fast and coming, well, for all of our jobs in different ways. I think it can be an incredibly useful tool, but also a very scary tool for journalists. But I think more than ever, showing that there are real humans behind the work that is being done is necessary.
I remember seeing an update from you sometime in the last couple of months about a journalist that you pitched you on a story that I think was, would you tell that story? Because it's just like absolutely. A short version of it, because it's such a weird story, but an example of the ways that sort of telling kind of truth from AI slop or some sort of manipulation, that it involves a combination of human and AI is becoming increasingly hard.
Absolutely. Yeah. So shortly after we published, on our site, we have writers guidelines, and there's editors at republic.land email address where people can send in pitches. So we started to get quite a few pitches from, freelance writers from across the country. And we got this amazing pitch from a woman named Victoria Goldie, who wanted to write about, sort of people living on the edges of poverty, using public lands as a kind of permanent space to live van life, not in the kind of romantic Instagram van life type of way, but in the just the realities of our country today, using public lands for those reasons. And we thought this is a great story, very interesting, presents all kinds of management challenges for our lands going forward. So right around that time that she pitched, we had hired Elizabeth Hightower Allen, our editorial director. So she and I both agreed this is a great pitch. She reached out to the writer, actually had a video call with her. Right before the video call, Victoria said, actually, I've got the terrible connection, so I'm just going to call you on the phone. But they did connect. And so we got the first draft in. It was good. We both thought it was really strong, but there was something uncanny about it. And to this day, I can't really describe what it was. It was like, as a journalist, you write your kind of context paragraph, and then you bring in a source to kind of tie a bow on it. And every one of those quotes that she would bring in after those context paragraphs was lyrical. It was like a perfect quote, almost too good to be true. And you're like, how did she find all these incredible sources? But we were kind of, we were so into the story that we wanted to believe. So she got the revise in, and Elizabeth, before kind of diving in one more time for a final edit, just decided to Google this woman's name again. And up popped a brand new story that had published the day before in a Toronto news outlet from a guy who had been pitched by this same woman. Wow. And then investigated all these things and came to discover that many of the stories that she had published in reputable places like New York Magazine and Vox and The Guardian had been fraudulent, that she had the sources that she had in those stories had never been contacted. And so she had just made up the quotes, and several of them said like, well, that sounds exactly like something I would have said, but I never actually talked to this journalist. So we think that Victoria was using AI to come up with story pitches. And what I think the prompt was she would take a, Outside Magazine, and she'd say, what would be a good pitch to Outside Magazine? And AI would be able to digest all of their contents and say, like, here's an idea. Because the range of published stories that she had was incredible. No freelance journalist knows about this many topics in retrospect, now that I see it. But John, what was so interesting about this is the number of journalists or editors that have reached out to me that have either published a story by Victoria Goldie or who had been approached by her at some point. And so I think it's increasingly this huge challenge for editors to figure out like what's real and what's not. And so much of that comes down to these relationships.
It's so hard, I think, for even a pretty educated reader to like at a glance tell what's true and what's false. And I guess I wonder how you think about part of my hypothesis is that personality is playing a bigger role in that. It's like, I trust you, therefore I trust what you say, right? That's which has some value, also has some danger to it. But I wonder how you see that evolving over time, where you might go off and do a 4-month reported story and you looked at all the, documents and you did all this stuff some random, MAGA Patriot 237 on, is like, I also found, this other thing and to the reader, one versus the other, who can tell?
It's so true. And I don't know that I have an answer. I mean, I think this is so new in this profession, particularly of a challenge, that I think all of us as journalists are trying to figure it out. I will say that, going back to the kind of journalism that we're specializing in, which is more long form, those types of stories really rely on sending a writer somewhere in the field where they can talk about what they're seeing and really describe scenes, when they can be in the presence of the characters that they're writing about and bring them to life. AI can't do that. That's sort of one of the
Yeah.
things that is left that they can't do, or it can't do. I don't know. What's the pronoun for AI?
They,
Um,
them.
Staying
but
it for a while for me
yes,
anyway.
staying it. You can send a journalist to a basketball game, and probably you could have AI, watch that same game and do a readout about what happened, and it might not be that different. And so figuring out ways where I think, AI is appropriate, similar like sending the transcript of a hearing in Washington, and then having AI, write a synopsis of what happened that day. I think that's a fair use of it. I think it's that the problem and the challenge is everything from these large language models is derivative of stuff that's been written before. And so there's nothing new in terms of the thought that's going to come out of them, at least yet, until we get to that full generative AI. I think the challenge is, again, putting the people behind the journalism in front of readers so that there is that trust, because I think naturally people are going to just want to trust a human. They want to read something that was written by a human. But also, I think as a profession and I get in trouble even sometimes with readers when I talk about this, but I think it's true, is like there are some really great uses of AI, and we shouldn't be so closed-minded as to say like there's nothing here for us in journalism and everything that we do is 100% pure, because I think there are ways that it can make journalism better, and we need to be open to those ideas.
We all need a ethical basis for making those decisions that's shared, that people are willing to adopt. It seems like this the combination of AI really coming into its own not long after what people are paid, what a single piece you can now get paid for, even a long form piece. That temptation now to be able to do huge breadths of stories and be able to pitch those to lots of different publications, because being an independent journalist, doing just freelance stuff, it's a tough row to hoe to make sure that you're able to generate the income.
That is such a good point, because I think we have created the circumstances for somebody like Victoria Goldie to exploit the system, and honestly, for good reason. I mean, it's not just tough out there. It's almost impossible to be a freelance writer unless you have some other kinds of resources that you're bringing to the table. But, I always tell the story that when I first started at Outside in 2000, they were paying, their long form writers $2 a word. That's a really good rate now. It's better than most rates now, 25 years later, and all the inflation that we've seen. So, and then you add on the fact that editors at these outlets are so busy. So you send in a pitch, and you're told in journalism school, only pitch one outlet at a time, because you don't want to create a bidding war, and then you piss off an editor at this outlet, and so just one at a time. But then sometimes you wait 3 weeks to get an answer.
Yeah. And then so your piece doesn't have relevance anymore.
Exactly.
Yep.
So, I think freelance journalists are very much in an impossible place in that way. I can't say that we're paying more than $2 a word, but it's been our kind of goal as an organization that's the starting point for these long form features, because we know what the kind of work that goes into them. And we know that, to get that kind of work, that people need to be properly paid.
Your business is fundamentally different in a number of ways. So how do you think about what success looks like right now?
In commercial media, once things really shifted from print to digital, it was all about clicks and eyeballs on those stories. I mean, fundamentally, when you publish a story, it's how much of an audience did it get, and the amount of tracking you could do for those stories was incredible. That's also came with a tremendous amount of pressure. And so in the back of my mind, it wouldn't be, will this story entertain people if I'm deciding whether to greenlight a big story? It's more like, will this story find an audience? Because I can't afford to do this unless I get a lot of eyeballs. And so that has a kind of determining factor on a lot of the journalism that gets covered. And so there's not the incentive to do hard-hitting kind of public interest, policy-driven journalism that is so important that we we continue to do, but the incentive structure is not there with in the commercial space. In the nonprofit space, a lot of the funders that believe in Republic and the work we're doing, they mostly want to know that the journalism that we're doing is having impact. And measuring impact is more difficult, but it's possible. But you want to know, like, really a good breakdown of who your readership is, because you want that to be an influential audience, that you're reaching people who can make decisions about the stuff that you're writing about. So if you want to show that you've got senators and congressmen on your newsletter list. You want to cite, any instances where your reporting, comes up in a hearing or is discussed by some of these agencies. And so that's kind of where what we're measuring in terms of success is the impact of our work. Like, is it driving conversations? Is it actually even influencing decisions? It's more challenging, I think, to really connect the dots between a story and this final outcome, but that's kind of what's essential in the nonprofit space.
Please do support the work that Chris is doing. This is a nonprofit. It is subscription supported, and we all need to be willing, whenever we're able to support the work that we find important with our dollars and by spreading the word about good work that's being done so other people become aware of it. Chris, cannot thank you enough for being here with us today.
Thank you. And Lisa, we're going to hire you to be one of our pitch people, because that was pretty good.
Thank you.
No, Chris, thanks so much.
Thank you.